Wow, what a great video on Heidegger. The YouTuber managed to make such an obscure and frustrating philosopher both digestible and even relatable. Obviously, I should smash that like button and subscribe and hit the bell, but before I do, let me see if I can do something about reading this Heidegger guy. Okay, so I looked up how to read Being in Time, I found this Reddit post and this comment. Let's see what it says. Okay, if you really wanted to get everything out of it, you'd probably need to study Plato and Aristotle in the original Greek, then Descartes, Kant, Nietzsche. Okay. Alright, give me a little bit. I need to do some more digging. I'll get back to you. Okay, so after my research, it seems Heidegger is going to be a very difficult read. I've compiled this decision tree based on what I've read and done, and what I need to read and do next. Being in Time is a hard book, and I need to make sure that I get everything I can from it. To make it simpler, I made it into this rough list so that I can follow it more simply. So I'll follow this list and check back in when I'm ready. Nauczyłem się mówić I czytać po polsku, po niemiecku, po grecku I po duńsku. Przeczytałem Kanta, Husserla I całą resztę. Teraz, nareszcie, mogę czytać Being and Time. Zaraz otworzę. O cholera, jest nadal za trudne. Okay, now obviously that was a bit of a joke. Even the comment I found was still relatively reasonable in the second half. That list I compiled was just a small sample of the relatively discouraging recommendations you might hear for what you have to do to properly read a philosophy book. I stumbled on many frustrating posts when I first read Being in Time, which was my first philosophy book ever, and it genuinely terrified me. I almost gave up, because if there was just no way I could read these books without being fluent in several languages and being infinitely familiar with the canon of philosophy, then I might as well never try. But this, to me, is a problem. Suggesting that someone learn to read in a foreign language just to get more out of a book isn't in any way actionable for most of the people who would probably like to engage with philosophy. Suggesting that people need to read Kant and Hegel before reading someone else is also generally a rough idea because Kant and Hegel are just as, if not more difficult to read than someone like Heidegger. People who stumble on comments similar to this in any way could have struggled, learned, and thought, but instead they probably gave up and watched TV. So I'm here today to offer a few alternative recommendations and pathways on how to start exploring philosophy if you're scared or feeling discouraged. This is going to be a pretty laid-back video and, not intended to be taken super seriously. It's more just some helpful tips that I found. I have to note 3 things first. For one, if you do have the time and the gumption, the above recommendations aren't necessarily wrong. I'll call the above route the formal route. It more closely resembles an academic approach to learning philosophy and reading philosophers. This way is probably the best way to get the absolute most out of what you read. My main problem with this approach is that it, again, isn't workable for 99% of people who want to read something interesting. But for those few who have the grit, time, intelligence, and resources, I say go for it. As can be expected, it will likely benefit you greatly. A second note is that I haven't read every philosophy book. Very, very far from it, in fact. And there are bound to be exceptions to what I say. I'm really going to discuss what has worked for me, and if any of these tips end up working for someone else, I consider that a win. The goal with these isn't that you take what I say as law. The goal is that if you're currently wanting to engage with philosophy and don't know how or where to start, that one or more of these routes may end up working for you better than the more traditional routes you may see recommended online. I should also say that this video is coming from someone who definitely struggles with reading some of these books. I find them to be extremely difficult and frequently complain about how the authors seem to be deliberately leaning into obfuscation for obfuscation's sake. Finally, much of this list is engineered to actually get you philosophizing, not just to read philosophy. Of course, reading philosophy is ultimately one of the main ways you will develop your ability to philosophize and to think critically, but it is just a step. That said, there is absolutely nothing wrong with reading purely for enjoyment, and this list will help you do that as well. And now, here are the tips. Number 1, read that hard book that you're interested in. This is the most relevant tip to the situation I joked about in the intro. You watched a YouTube video, read a book, were scrolling online, or whatever, and you heard about a book that sounds interesting. Maybe you buy it, maybe you do further investigation into it, whatever. But it soon becomes apparent that the book is hard. Like very hard. There are multiple posts on Reddit, Goodreads, whatever, complaining about how impossible it is to understand. You may find some posts similar to what I outlined above. What should you do? I say read it. Fuck it. You're interested in the book, and it's very possible that the interest may sustain you long enough to actually get through it. This addresses another problem with the formal method of reading philosophy. Some of those books are boring, and if you aren't truly interested in them, you might just put them down and never even get to the one you actually wanted to read. But the interest that you have could have propelled you to take your time with the book, look up terms, read extra articles, make posts asking for help, etc. It might drive you to genuinely get through it because whatever it discusses has been shown to be particularly salient with you. When I read Being in Time, it was purely out of interest, and I refused to read any books that may have helped, or learn German to read it, and I had a difficult time with it. Many parts of it are very, very difficult to understand. I took more than 60 pages of notes. I asked friends in the philosophy major, I read extra articles, and even then I probably didn't understand half, and I remember even less. But despite that, this was one of the best and most impactful times of my life. Struggling through that book remains one of my happiest accomplishments, and today I count Being in Time as a formative book for me. It inspired me to make philosophy videos on YouTube years down the line, and I never would have had that if I had listened to that post or posts like it and given up, because they were very discouraging. The thing is, you don't have to justify whatever book you read. If you're interested in it, read it, and do what you can with it. If someone shames you for jumping in too deep, that's their own problem. Philosophy as a field of study isn't a checklist that was handed down by God. It is something for you to engage with in the way that fits you best. And you can also read secondary literature. Read a commentary or an interpretation. These kinds of books often give you a lot of historical and contextual insight, or just explain vocabulary that can unlock vast portions of otherwise incomprehensible material. Years down the line, I read Eclipse of the Self by Michael Zimmerman, which situated Being in Time historically, giving it much needed context, and really unlocked a better understanding of what Heidegger was trying to do. Now, there is a danger of reading secondary literature, and that is that you just take the other person's interpretation as your own. In most cases, the person writing these sources is likely to have followed the formal route, and thus probably does have a lot more insight than you. But if you disagree with something they say, disagree with it, and try to strengthen your own position. That's what philosophy is about at the end of the day. Thinking and arguing. It's not about understanding what some guy from 1940s Germany says. There are some other methods I've encountered that I think can be very helpful when tackling the difficult monolith that you're trying to read. I actually just finished reading Nihil Unbound by Ray Brassier. It's a dense book that covers many philosophers from the last century or two, so I likely could have really benefited from following something like the formal route here. But again, I'm stubborn and I just want to read the cool book that sounds interesting to me. Now, the ethics of this suggestion may be up for debate, but I have been having what I think are great successes consulting my interpretations with AI like ChatGPT and DeepSeek. For the most part, I've been struggling through it and doing my best, and generally I think I'm coming away with a decent understanding. But in some sections, I get a little bit lost in jargon, don't understand a concept fully, can't actually follow an argument, or am just unfamiliar with some text that Nihil Unbound is referencing. When this happens, I come up with my best possible interpretation, give it to the AI, give it the relevant passage, and ask it for feedback. Very often I come away much more confident in what I read, and end up being more able to tackle future sections. The crucial point here is that I'm trying on my own first. Letting the AI just tell you what it means without doing your due diligence is not going to help you get better at reading philosophy, And trying for yourself before ensures that if the AI misinterprets something, you're more likely to catch its mistake. The AI is very smart, but not all-knowing, and they do make mistakes. And also, if the book is still very poorly written or unclear, there's only so much an AI can do as well. A second method I tried recently with a lot of success was reading with a friend. He wanted to read The Accursed Share, Volume 1, after we watched Martyrs together. Don't do that. And asked me to go through it with him. I'd always heard Bataille was very obscure and strange, and I didn't have high hopes about my ability to understand him. What I found is that reading with a partner had 3 major benefits. The first is that I actually finished the book largely because we were reading it together. I wasn't super excited about the book, and my interest level varied drastically throughout, but I pushed through and got what I can from it, largely because I had what I felt was an obligation to my friend. The second is that I found I read much more carefully because I knew I would have to discuss afterward, often days later. I can sometimes fall into lazy reading where I basically passively intake words and not much of it goes beyond a surface level understanding, if understanding even covers it. Normally this leads to a lot of rereading and struggling, but here I would really take my time, focus, and try my best to make things make sense. The third benefit is that I got to discuss what I thought afterwards, and nearly everything we talked about I learned something new. Either we came up with a relevant example, he explained something I didn't understand, I had to explain something he didn't understand and thus had to clarify my own thoughts, or we disagreed and argued about it, which led us to a better understanding overall. Or, best of all, we just disagreed with Bataille. If you have a friend who is pretty consistent and interested in things like this, I would highly recommend this method. Another strong recommendation is again taking notes. Summarize the book to yourself, ask questions, write down words to look up, etc. In my experience, engaging with the book in this way makes it more memorable and also helps put yourself up to a more critical reading rather than a passive read. Number 2. Read something that you disagree with. While I think there is a lot to be said for reading the hard book you're interested in, sometimes you may just want to read something philosophical but don't really know where to begin, and maybe Plato doesn't sound very fun. Though I would really say read Euthyphro. You could also try to find a philosophy book you disagree with on a topic you're interested in. This might be counterintuitive. For one, how can you know you disagree with something before actually reading it? And second, why not just read something you actually agree with? For the first point, generally, you can infer someone's point from a book's description, or maybe tell based on the discourse surrounding the book, and usually one may have some prior intuition about the issue at hand that can tell you whether or not you disagree with it. For the second point, reading something you agree with can be gratifying. You get to feel correct, you get to strengthen your own intuitively derived position, you're more likely to actually read it, but there are very real benefits to reading something you disagree with. For one, it simulates argument. Exposing yourself to different ways of thinking broadens your overall understanding of the world. It can break you out of your own shell and force you to confront different modes of thought. The comfortable opinions you have are placed into the danger of being wrong, or at least not fully being correct. This is how you do philosophy. You submit your own and other ideas to scrutiny. Reading stuff you disagree with can force you to do it. It forces you to clarify your own thoughts and opinions. It makes you try to dismantle the arguments of others. It makes you try to strengthen your own position and weaken others. And best of all, it may even make you change your mind. I myself am agnostic, and I used to have fantastic times reading books on the philosophy of religion, Christianity, and just talking to my friends about these topics. Most often, these ideas would be running through my head for hours, if not days, and I count these times as very important to my philosophical experiences. Sometimes you can combine agreement and disagreement with a philosophical dialogue. For me, the best one I've read was Hume's Dialogues Concerning Natural Religion. Not only was this book excellent and fun to read, but it gave what I thought was a fair account of both sides of the argument, and gave me many opportunities to hone my philosophical skills. Number 3. Read a collection of papers on a topic. Philosophy recommendations and education more broadly tend to be very book-focused. But there's a very real alternative, and that's reading papers. When I decided to read Being in Time, I was very interested in existentialism. I had just come off a personal existential crisis, transferred schools, switched majors, read the novels of Camus and Sartre, and generally wanted to learn more about living authentically. Something that may have served me just as well potentially as reading Being in Time would have been to just read a collection of writings on such topics. Reading collections like this does serve a different purpose than reading a full, singular book. A writer's magnum opus immerses you in their world, their system. You get a feel for their revolutionary character in their writing, and oftentimes your worldview can be transformed entirely. Reading a collection of papers or essays in a field does something different. You get a sense for the underlying issues within a debate. What are people disagreeing on? How are they trying to resolve issues? Where do the different perspectives on this topic arise from? What consequential positions do they lead to? Reading a major work can offer depth. Reading a collection of essays can offer breadth. You can understand the field as a whole, really dive into the meat of a topic. And once again, the benefit of this kind of reading is that it simulates a debate and provokes thinking. You will likely end up reading people you agree and disagree with, forcing you to do everything that suggestion number 2 entailed. Similar to reading a dialogue, you're able to learn how other people make replies and formulate their own arguments. You learn how to dissect a topic, how to find weaknesses, mount counterattacks. In other words, you learn how to do philosophy. Recently, I read a collection of Thomas Nagel's papers called Mortal Questions. His essay, What Is It Like to Be a Bat, really resonated with me, and I ended up doing a little bit of a deep dive into this field, reading further papers and excerpts from Chalmers, Gallagher, etc. I loved this, and I really liked seeing exactly how and where disagreements can come from. Maybe I'm alone in this, but I sometimes find that when reading a single work, I can be in danger of just reading uncritically, agreeing with everything the author says, or getting lost in just the mere effort of understanding them. This method safeguards against that somewhat, and is ideal for introductory reading because essays are often shorter, explain their terms better, and are just easier to read. Number 4, read a collection of essays from a single philosopher. This method offers similar benefits to method 1. You get the depth of understanding one person's overall viewpoints, can see how they develop over time, and really learn their point of view. Most interestingly, you can see how their most basic convictions get applied to many different fields. In Mortal Questions, it was a joy to see how Nagel applied his general subjective versus objective split to many different topics. I find this method can work as a starting point for reading philosophy because many people still get interested in philosophy at first because of a specific philosopher. They hear about Nietzsche or Sartre or Heidegger or Nagel or whoever and want to read their major works. Sometimes this may be the only option, but other times they have a collection of essays available that can, in many cases, be easier to get through and offer a more thorough examination of how they view the world. Thus, you can allow your interest to sustain your reading while benefiting from the easier language that essays can offer. I do, however, want to discuss some things to be wary of. Number 1 is starting with secondary literature. Secondary literature is great. As mentioned before, you benefit from the knowledge of someone who did the formal route, put in the work, and came away with a very deep understanding of a topic or a writer. I can recommend this method because it generally promises the benefits of recommendation number 1, where you get to learn about the thing you're interested in, and is usually written in much easier language. I have read a couple books like this, and they usually have been very good experiences, like the aforementioned Eclipse of the Self. However, this method does come with the drawback of option 1, but to an even greater degree. The danger of option 1 is that you get too caught up in just understanding what the author is saying and not being critical. These secondary books tend to be written in an explanatory fashion, and it is thus easy to engage with them in that same fashion. Be careful to remember that the ultimate goal of reading philosophy, in my view, is to engage with ideas and arguments, and clarify your perspective of the world. Not to be a historian of philosophy, unless that's your goal, of course. Similarly, the writers of these books, while probably having a very good understanding of a writer, are still doing an interpretation. They are still only espousing their own viewpoint of what an author says. Be careful not to uncritically accept what they say as law. And number 2, be realistic about what's possible. Mostly a danger of option number 1, the worry I have, based on my own experiences and what I've seen, is that you may become too preoccupied with understanding 100% of what some author is saying. This undoubtedly motivates the formal route to a certain extent, the promise being that with enough hard work and learning, you can fully and unequivocally understand what someone was saying in their book. Unfortunately, this is inherently impossible and can only lead to a false confidence of understanding or resignation in the face of an unknowingly impossible goal. Think about it like fluency in a language, something particularly salient to me as I struggled deeply with learning Polish. Even in your native language, do you know every single thing about that language? Do you know every single word? Are you aware of every single grammatical form? Are you constantly updated on new linguistic developments? The answer to all of these is no for every single person, no matter how smart or knowledgeable they are. It's impossible. A text, such as a philosophy book, especially difficult and monolithic ones, are contextual and living documents that were written by someone whose mind is fundamentally inaccessible to you. If your goal is to understand exactly what the author meant, that is impossible because you can't get into their head and most of the time have no way of confirming what you're thinking, and the author themselves may not even be aware of the full implications of what they wrote. If your goal is to unlock the final, ultimate interpretation, this is also impossible because great books don't have one interpretation, they lend themselves to multiple interpretations, and new possibilities for interpretations are constantly being generated as new books are written, time passes, and knowledge is generated and lost. Basically, try not to get caught up in the act of mere understanding or merely interpreting. The beauty of philosophy is ultimately how it can change you, and how you can find novel ways to engage with ideas. Plus, as I said earlier, philosophy isn't a checklist that you go down in order. You don't read Plato once, then Aristotle once, then Descartes, then Hume, then Kant, then Hegel, then blah 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 blah. You can, of course you can, but the point is that you can read whatever you want and return to it. You don't have to jump right into the next thing. Read a book twice. Sometimes that may genuinely be worth more than moving into the next philosopher only barely understanding the last one. With that out of the way, this is the end of the video. Again, these are just ways that I have found particularly useful based on my own experiences. There are bound to be other methods or ideas that are equally valid for other people, and I hope people who watch this will share their ways in the comments. Thank you for watching. I mentioned Heidegger a few times in this video, and if you're interested, I have 2 videos that primarily cover him, with a follow-up video that briefly engages with him again. Additionally, I had a video on the difference in differences method that may be interesting to you if you like statistics, economics, and causal inference, or just hate yourself. I also mentioned philosophy of religion here, and if that sounds cool, I just did 2 videos on Pascal's wager that I'm very happy with, and I think most watchers might also like them. If you like this video, I'd also appreciate a subscription and a like, and we'll try to make it worth your while. Until next time.